Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Leah Ashragi, and I am the Senior Director of Clinical Research at Dr. Susan Love Foundation for Breast Cancer Research. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce you to our organization. Dr. Susan Love Foundation challenges the status quo to end breast cancer through innovative research and improve the lives of people impacted through education and advocacy. We drive collaborative, cutting-edge research with non-traditional partners, shed light on the collateral damage of treatment and actively seek ways to diminish it, and interpret science to empower breast cancer patients. Many of the projects the foundation undertakes are designed to increase our understanding of the human breast, where breast cancer starts, and what enables malignancy to occur, with the ultimate goal of developing methods to prevent it in the first place. The foundation is also committed to participation in research that has the potential to positively impact the lives of all people who are at risk for or who have breast cancer. Breast cancer happens to more than just women, so research needs to be done on all human beings, and that means men, women, non-binary people, everyone who gets breast cancer. Our Love Research Army, formerly known as the Army of Women, is committed to encouraging and facilitating breast cancer research for all people, regardless of age, race, gender, sexual identity, with or without a breast cancer diagnosis. We are committed to thoughtfully engaging over 380,000 members by providing them with ongoing, real-time access to an array of studies. So today's topic stems from our commitment to diversity and inclusion in the research we conduct and recruit for, and we are excited to have this amazing panel that will share their unique experiences and insights on this topic. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Today, you will be hearing from Dr. Susan Love, our founder and chief visionary officer, Michael Kovarik, a metastatic breast cancer patient and advocate, Michael Singer, a breast cancer survivor and advocate for the Male Breast Cancer Coalition, and Dr. Athena Starlard Davenport, a professor of genetics at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. So welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for joining us today. Our panelists will be available to answer questions from our viewers at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions using the Q&A box. And while we will try to cover and answer as many questions as possible, please note that we may not be able to address every question today. So to get things kicked off, I'd like to start by asking an open question to all of our panelists. So each of you represents a different perspective within the research process. Can you share a bit about your role in that process and what you've experienced or witnessed in relation to diverse and inclusive representation in research? And Dr. Love, if you'd like to kick things off with.
Well, I have at this stage, because I'm old, I've had a lot of different roles. I've been was trained as a breast cancer surgeon and worked as a breast cancer surgeon in Boston and then in LA. I also have had not breast cancer, but leukemia. And so I have a cancer patient experience now that I bring to bear. And then I've also had a couple of medical startups trying to fix breast cancer and then decided they only cared about money and I wanted to change the world. So now we have the Dr. Susan Love Research Foundation. And really our goal is to figure breast cancer out in people, not rats, and end the disease once and for all.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to weigh in on that question?
Sure. Hello. Oh, sorry. Hello, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Genetics, Genomics, and Informatics, So as a researcher, my lab focuses on understanding genetic and environmental factors that might contribute to breast cancer in African-American women. And the goal of my research is really to find ways to prevent and better treat the disease. And I've studied breast cancer for over 10 years now. And some of the things that I've found is that African-American women are not equally represented in research. And there's a significant disparity in the inclusion of Black and Brown populations in cancer research, but in research in general. Yet these populations are most at risk of dying from these diseases. So So research should be more inclusive and diverse to those populations that are most affected. So I'm really happy to be here today to discuss this.
And I'm a lead advocate for the Male Breast Cancer Coalition. I'm a breast cancer thriver. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary. And I've seen a lot of changes, especially over the last 5 years, attending different conferences like San Antonio or ASCO. And when the presenters talked, it was always women this, women that. And now more recently, instead of saying women or men, they mention patients. And it helps reduce the stigma and maybe make the men who are breast cancer patients a little more relaxed to talk about it, because up until that point, it's just seemed very embarrassing, non-inclusive, and we want to be part of the research.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael. Back in 2007, I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. And then 2010 had a recurrence. But it wasn't until 2015, June of 2015, that I finally met another man in person who was going through the disease, and it was Michael Singer. And we have developed a wonderful, wonderful friendship with that link. And like Michael, I was very involved with the Male Breast Cancer Coalition until shortly after September of 2015, when I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And at that point, my focus kind of shifted from early stage, and that men get breast cancer, to stage 4, and that men get stage 4 breast cancer. And also with the fact of, which I didn't realize until I became metastatic, that the amount of research funds that are allocated to specific studies about the women and men living with metastatic breast cancer. And I became involved with an organization called Metaviver, whose goal, is to raise awareness of metastatic breast cancer, and also to raise funds for research that is solely focused on metastatic breast cancer. And so I've been through attending conferences, getting educated, as well as helping to educate researchers and other participants about the need for also that to include men within their vocabulary, to include men within studies, and hopefully that we can start changing all.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. We are going to kind of follow up Dr. Starler-Davenport with something that you started talking about already. So with you specializing in the study of genetics and their role in cancer risk, can you kind of talk a little bit more about what you know about representation of minority communities in research?
Sure. So it's been long recognized that minority communities are significantly underrepresented in clinical and health-related research studies, despite the fact that they often suffer disproportionately from these diseases, including cancer. And so the large majority of research studies are mainly conducted in white populations, European American white populations. Yet when you think about how many African Americans are in the United States, over 40 million individuals of African descent are in the United States, but less than 5% of research studies include populations or Black minority communities in those research studies.
Thank you so much. Well, we are going to go to Dr. Love with a question. Why is it important to have dedicated research on trans men and women with breast cancer?
Well, I think the nice thing about having a variety of populations to study that are not quite the same is you can learn a lot from the biology as well as their disease and how to take care of their disease. There was a really fascinating recent study from the Netherlands where they have they track everybody who's transgender, and they followed 2,260 transgender women who had been born men and then had changed to women. And within that group, they found 15 cases of breast cancer, which is a lot higher. It was actually 46% times higher than what you would expect in a group of men who had been men from birth. And the tumors were all ductal and they were all hormone positive. And so the question is, can you learn something from that? Can you learn how much is the hormones, how much some of them had a BRCA gene, what are the combinations that are important? And then they also, in this same study, looked at 1,229 trans men who were born women, and there were 4 cases of breast cancer, which is also significantly higher statistically than you would expect. And they realized that you still have to screen for breast cancer, that taking testosterone and having your breast tissue removed, when you're trans, you're probably not having it all removed. There's some left over, you have the hormones. So studying everybody gives us not only lets us help these different groups, but gives us clues to the disease in general. And then that can help us understand better how it works, and then by seeing how it works in different situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like for all the situations, it's helpful to do breast cancer studies that focus on the wide breadth of the population, but also studies that look specifically at populations that need some extra, research into them, like the trans population.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great. So we're going to ask both the Michaels this question. So in the breast cancer research landscape, men are considered a minority. What do you want people to know about the experience of being a male breast cancer survivor or metastatic breast cancer patient and advocate? And as a follow-up, what obstacles do you and other men face in participating in the research process?
All right, well, I'll start. We're affectionately known as the 1%ers in many conversations, as we're 1% of the breast cancer population. But if you're in that 1%, it's not good. I mean, on average, this year it'd be 2,620 men are going to be diagnosed with some form of breast cancer. And unfortunately, 500 of those men are going to pass due to the latter stages of their diagnosis. And, trying to raise the awareness, and that's what we do a lot with the coalition, is to, train men in the early warning signs, because let's face it, I was brought up that women got breast cancer. I was 50 years old after my sister had passed from metastatic breast cancer that I first found out that men can get breast cancer. But there are so many obstacles that we deal with. And I think just getting the awareness with the coalition, we've partnered with many organizations across the world trying to raise awareness so that men aren't stigmatized when they get a diagnosis, or aren't embarrassed to talk about it when they get the diagnosis. And I'm still a young man, and Michael's still a young man, and I know men as young as 18 years old who are diagnosed with breast cancer. It's not an old man's disease. That's a myth, and that's an obstacle. That it's a woman's disease, that's an obstacle. To change the dialogue, as we're doing here today with this, that there are other people out there who get breast cancer, and we need to include everybody, not just limit it to the women. So, when talking to researchers about male breast cancer, they say, well, it's never been done that way, starting research. And we're trying to change that conversation. When we're exhibitors at the San Antonio or ASCO with the coalition, we're meeting tons of researchers from this country as well as internationally who've never met a man with breast cancer or don't have any in their practice. And the look on their face when they walk up to me is like in amazement. They're looking at the poster that says Male Breast Cancer Coalition, and it's kind of like settling in that, oh my God, maybe I forgot about this whole portion of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on what Michael was sharing, for me, it has been, I had the opportunity to speak at a conference that Mediviver and MRS did on their engagement conference. And I spoke about changing our breast cancer vocabulary. You know, so many times, like when we're at a conference and researchers or doctors are giving out, you know, their study data, and it's all using the pronoun her, using the pronoun she, or the word women. And just by changing that vocabulary, by going women and men, it highlights not only to the participants, but to to everyone there. But it becomes, once that becomes a natural part of the vocabulary, when we're talking about breast cancer, it educates, the medical community. It educates other patients. I mean, unfortunately now, it's really important that parents, and it's mainly, the moms within families that have that conversation with their daughters about breast cancer. And now, because we're becoming more visible, that important conversation, now is including their sons, which I think is, that's going to make such a big difference. Also, part of it is also we need to encourage more men to attend conferences, because I think the more visible we are, then it becomes easier for people to recognize the importance of inclusion, and especially even with, with clinical trials, that a researcher may be up there talking, seeing male faces within there, hearing their story along with the stories of others, is going to make them start thinking about, wow, maybe I need to really start looking at how do we include men within our clinical trials? So, and, going through, I know, Michael, you've talked about this in the past, like at doctors' offices, and everything is just kind of geared towards women. I mean, that is changing. When we're filling out the forms, were you ever pregnant? And so
When
on.
your last menstrual cycle.
Yeah, and so that's, and it's going to take time. But I think what's going to help it is the visibility of men at these important conferences, asking questions, sharing their stories. Just like what Athena was sharing about, the more Black women and men share their stories, they become then more part of the picture. And I think that's the main thing that, to try to focus on.
Leah, when I first got diagnosed back in 2010, and I went home looking for information on male breast cancer, when I Googled it, there was nothing out there.
Yeah.
So times are definitely changing, because now I can Google it, and besides the coalition coming up, Coleman's got stuff, Dr. Love has stuff, American Cancer Society has stuff, Women Beyond Breast Cancer, Medifive. Now it's becoming more mainstream where men are showing up on it. And like Athena was mentioning, in the African American community, the incidence rate is higher for Black males than it is for white males. And we try to do these health fairs and work with organizations to raise that awareness. And when I'm at the table, believe it or not, it's the women who come up and I talk about male breast cancer, and then they go back to their fathers and grandfathers and husbands and children to share the information. The guys won't approach the table. It's weird.
I think we're kind of in phase 2 of breast cancer awareness, because we've saturated the the media with breast cancer awareness for women, but this is kind of phase 2 of that breast cancer awareness campaign, of really looking at the men and making sure people are looking at it in a more holistic viewpoint. So that's great. Well, thank you both for all the work that you've done to move that campaign forward. So we are going to have a question for Michael Kovarik. You were first diagnosed with early stage breast cancer in 2007 and have been living with metastatic breast cancer since 2015. So as a gay man, how has your experience evolved?
That's a great question. It was interesting at the beginning, because my background as an elementary teacher, I was not out there about being gay. And it took me some time to really feel comfortable sharing that. And I think what helped was ironically my very first oncologist was a gay woman. And so it was very easy. I mean, my partner Tim has been with me since the beginning of this journey. But it also, what it added to me was, especially when my first oncologist retired and the second one that I was in within this organization, I just realized how important it was for my doctor to know every aspect of my life. And that, you know, my partner is very much a part of this path that I'm on with, you know, at first with the early stage and now with the metastatic stage. And I've been very fortunate, you know, here in upstate New York, that I have not had any bad circumstance with any of my doctors, with the fact that I am gay. And part of that has been great. And when I share my stories, you know, when I'm talking to people, you know, I do share about being gay because I also want the gay community to realize how important that is. Because the more your doctor knows about you, it becomes more of a partnership as you're going through this treatment. And that's important.
Yeah.
And they begin to know every aspect of you. And so that when, like in my cases, if there was, you know, progression or anything like that, they made sure they were involving Tim. They made sure that he had ample opportunity to ask questions, to share what he was seeing that I was going through with the different drugs that I had been on. And it just really reinforced to me how important it is to have that kind of partnership, that kind of two-way connection with your doctor. And, you know, and not just as a gay person, but as a patient. And I mean, with my second oncologist, there was a disconnect, and it had nothing to do with me being gay or anything. But I ended up choosing to stop my treatment and my time with that doctor and hook up with another doctor that I knew I had that connection with. And it just emphasized to me how I needed to feel comfortable enough that I could just, you know, be vulnerable and just open up and share everything that I felt I needed to share. And I needed for them to know about who Michael is. And that's been part of, like, when I go and talk with people, is I share that because I want people to understand that that is such an integral part of our healing and our treatment, is that it's a two-way street. And I do think that, you know, being gay helped me push myself, because I was not really someone that proclaimed that I was gay to people until I actually started. I had to, in order to feel that I was very much part of this path of healing.
Well, and I think that answer is applicable to everyone in terms of that partnership with the caregiver or with the oncologist, and being able to have that relationship with you and your caregiver as you're going through the treatment and everything. So
And that they're very conscious of the importance of that partner, whether it's someone's partner, their wife, or their husband, is there. And there's no, you know,
I was going
there's
to say,
no.
sometimes it's the best friend.
Yes.
You're more close to your best friend than you are to your spouse or something.
Yeah.
That's the person you want to have there. So, I mean, it's important that they realize that you get to pick.
Yes.
exactly. Okay, well, I am going to kind of circle back to the inclusion of diverse populations and just ask a question for everyone. And we've already touched upon this a little bit, but if there's anything else that the panelists would like to add, the question is, from a scientific standpoint, why is it essential to include diverse populations in research? And like I said, I know we've touched upon this already a little bit, but if there's anything else that you'd like to put in on that.
Yeah, so I I just feel very adamant that research should be diverse and inclusive, but it should be representative of the general population. The population here globally and around in the United States. And so everybody is generally at risk of getting certain diseases. Everybody takes medication. Well, not to say everybody, but people take vitamins, they take medications. You go for screening for different diseases for early detection. And so research should just not be representative of one ethnic group or one gender. It needs to be representative of the global population, because all the drugs that we take, screening, all those things affect us all. And it has to be tested just not in one population, but in everybody. I know I keep harping on that, but it's critical because, everybody is individual. We're all unique. We all have different genetic makeup, which can definitely affect how certain drugs react in one's body. So yes, research should definitely be more inclusive.
Great.
Now, one thing that reminds me of is when I started, there was one breast cancer gene, BRCA. It was most common in people who were of Jewish ethnicities, and then there was BRCA1 and BRCA2. And now we know that in the African American community, there's a gene that tracks back to the western coast of Africa, since before slavery. Because the thing with breast cancer is, even though you may eventually die of it, you don't do it, you have time to reproduce before you get it and die. You can get it in your early 20s and then get breast cancer in your 30s. And so the genes get passed on. In the Hispanic community, there's actually an Aztec gene that tracks back to the Aztec people and mutation that makes them more at risk of breast cancer. So it's an interesting disease in that even though it seems like you get it young, you get it at an age where you have time to pass it on. And there's also hereditary breast cancer in the male community as well.
Leah, basically men have been excluded because they always said it's rare. But if they don't see a difference in the efficacy or safety anticipated in the study,
Right.
Why not include us? And I think the medical field felt very strongly about that. So last year in August, the Food and Drug Administration put out a guidance to include men in these research studies. And if they didn't see a reason, safety-wise or efficacy, why not include it? Because if they do these studies, maybe they'll find something in that research on men that will lead to other areas, whether it's something like the Swedish study you mentioned or other drug studies. Because Michael and I want to be here for a long time.
Yes.
And
we want you here.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it's also important, Leah, because I know, especially with being a man, living with breast cancer, and we've been talking about, I'm being told that what they do for women is definitely what should be done with men. And yet there's still that part of me inside of me that's saying, I don't know, there needs to be that. And so, coming from that is that whole idea of, treatment really being individualized. And, not only for men, but I also, to back up what Athena has been sharing, as I've been doing more advocacy work and working with other African American women and finding out, 42%, they die at a 42% higher rate than, than white women and men. And I think it's so important that if we're really going to, try to find the best therapies possible, it has to be individualized, and it has to be targeted towards that individual, whether it's, a gender or whether it's a race within, the genders. And I think that's why it's so important, you know, along with the fact that, you know, this isn't just a white person's disease,
No.
you know?
That's for sure.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, I think that's also why it has to be, and it needs to be so much more diverse and inclusive.
Well, I think we all agree. And I think then the next hurdle is getting people to participate in research studies. And so, Athena, we had a question for you. What are the biggest barriers for people from minority communities to be able to participate in research studies? And what are some strategies researchers can implement to overcome those barriers for the research participants?
Okay, so for the first part, so in general, besides like logistical challenges, like being able to be travel to participate in the research study, costs such as childcare, trying to find somebody to take care of your child while you try to participate in the study. The main issue that I've read about is that there's always been a lack of mistrust within the minority communities as it relates to participation in research. And of course, this stems from a long history of the misuse of or mistreatment of Black and Brown populations, minority communities in research, from the Tuskegee syphilis study to, I watched the movie the other day, the Henrietta Lacks study, how they misused her tissue and generated, you know, so these immortalized cell lines, which are crucial to research. And I've used those cell lines in my research before, and not to obtain consent to use her research, and then the companies become rich. And okay, so I can keep going on and on and on about that. But lack of mistrust has been what I've seen in literature, a major issue. But what I've found in my research study, so I'm really interested in, like I mentioned, genetics of Black women. I'm trying to understand the causes of it. So when I came here to Memphis in January of 2016 and accepted my first faculty position, I wanted to hit the ground running to really develop like a community-based genetic research study to understand those causes of disparities in the Black community here, particularly with breast cancer. And so the strategy that I felt was really critical, and what I found very important, was the establishment of key partnerships with physicians and community advocates, somebody that the community already trusts. Even though I'm African American, I'm a researcher, they don't know me. They didn't know who I was, who I am. So establishing those relationships with the community advocates was very critical, as well as with clinicians, because it did have to establish trust. And also, in not only establishing those relationships, I also went out and made it my effort to not only just collect saliva samples to look for genetic markers of risk, but also I found it very important to educate the community about breast cancer. That was really a very important part of the study, because I've actually learned a lot from the women. A lot of the women didn't realize that there were different types of breast cancer. They never heard of triple negative breast cancer. And some, you know, and that was just shocking to me. So I really felt, you know, connected to the community, and I felt like they were given to me. Well, I was given to them, but actually they were given to me more, because I learned so much about the community, and I'm still learning about the community. And it was very helpful in my research and continues to be helpful in my research.
I think that really, you know, it's a two-way street. It's not just, you know, people participating and they get nothing out of it. There has to be a two-way street. So the education and that you're providing, I think, makes for that better relationship. Go ahead, Michael.
Celia, at a recent conference that Dr. Love put on, a bunch of advocates had gotten together with some doctors also. And we saw one of the obstacles also being the language on these release forms and the amount of pages on these release forms to participate for any community. I mean, you had to be a lawyer to read through some of this stuff. And we were just, as a group, trying to brainstorm how to streamline it or make it easier so that the average Mike or Mary off the street could read this form and say, yeah, I want in, I'll sign off on this without having, you know, a payroll or lawyers behind you.
Well, that actually segues nicely into the next question that we have for you, Michael Singer, and that is about clinical trials. And so that kind of goes along with this second part of what was the experience like. So are clinical trials generally open to men? And then have you or someone you know participated in a clinical trial? And if so, what was the experience like? And that consent form is obviously part of the experience.
Right. So I had to research a little bit about this. And I follow, well, generally the clinical trials are not open to men, if you want to talk generally and, you know, maybe define that word. But I follow a gentleman, his name is Dr. Oliver Bagla, and he himself is a male breast cancer patient. His wife is a breast cancer patient. And he updates from the National Cancer Institute clinical trials weekly that are open to men. And currently, there were 21 open to men on the National Cancer Institute as of last month. But if you go into like clinicaltrials.gov and just make it a broader, you know, search that you're looking for, you know, you'll get a couple of hundred for men as compared to, you know, 10,000 for women. And then when you break the research down, you know, phase 1 to phase 2, when you get to a phase 4 trial for men, there were only 2 that were available for men at that point compared to, you know, several hundred for women. But myself, I was early stage and I didn't participate in the clinical trial, but I know several men through the coalition, and some have had good experiences with clinical trials, and you know, some of them just talking to them had to go through a panel of doctors asking questions to see if they, you know, were going to be able to it. And of course, you know, if you have brain mets, they exclude you. If you have this, they exclude you. And then I've talked to men who, you know, unfortunately the doctor, you know, promised them, this is the golden ticket, this clinical trial. I'm gonna get you in it. And then within 3 weeks, the doctor called him up, said, I got to get you off this trial because you're going to get real sick really fast if I don't, you know, get you off. And now, you know, he's, like Athena was mentioning, he doesn't trust the medical field now because here he was promised a golden ticket, and now, you know, the tumors just spread like wildfire. So we're not seeing as many clinical trials for men, but like we're talking here today, this is, you know, hopefully going to change the dynamic and maybe open some more stuff for men. But as far as what is available, is very limited for men.
Great. Well, and that again is a great segue into the next question for both of Michael Singer and Michael Kovarik. And so this one is kind of piggybacking on some stuff that we've already talked about and you guys have already talked about, but what kind of work is happening within the advocacy field to increase the number of trials available to men and educate men on their breast cancer risk? And I think you guys have touched upon that, but feel free to expand. And I think the other important follow-up question is how can researchers and clinicians support these efforts? It's not just you guys going out there and being advocates, there need to have that, again, that two-way relationship.
Yeah.
Good, Michael, you want to start?
Yeah, you know, I think probably one of the biggest thing is visibility of men within this community, so that the researchers are aware of that, so that when they are developing the protocols for a clinical trial, it's including that vocabulary, women and men.
Right.
Because I think that's the biggest hurdle, is the visibility of men within this community. And the fact that because our population is like 1% of it, it's very easy to say, well, you know, to just kind of not ignore it, but to forget about that men are part of this community. And again, that all becomes part of connecting, you know, having webinars, having conferences where researchers and, you know, and individuals, patients of you know, a diverse group of patients on there. That's what it's going to be. It's putting a face with this disease, that it is not just a woman, and it's not just, you know, most likely a woman who is white. It is a man who could be white or black. It is a woman, you know, who is African American, Black, Hispanic, you know, as well as men. It's that visibility of people included on these type of projects that get a face with the disease.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it's going to change.
Yeah. It should start out with the widest field of, we're going to include everybody, and then only if there's a scientific reason would you maybe hone it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. Just to piggyback on what Dr. Love and Michael are saying is, I find it like really important to have advocates, both men and women and transgender, at conferences like San Antonio and ASCO, and have these people, like Michael said, face to face with researchers and doctors. You know, having you know, different groups like Alamo bringing people out, or National Breast Cancer Coalition, or Dr. Love's group. The more you can bring out there, it makes that event more enriched. Just that the doctors start to communicate and break off and talk to them about different research projects. To me, it's frustrating because when you go to these poster sessions, these are young researchers, young doctors, you know, they're trying to make their mark in the research field. And when I go, the most I've ever seen was 5 posters on male breast cancer at one conference. And I've seen as little as 1 poster, but being able to gain the interest, or you know, when I see this poster, I'll bring as many people over, whether you get the advocates with GRASP coming over to talk about it, or you have someone like Dr. Love escorting you over and explaining the poster to me, or some of the other doctors. It becomes, people are looking and saying, oh wait, that's a poster on male breast cancer. I'm doing something over here. Maybe that's something that would interest people and get momentum. There's a researcher's name is Dr. Pablo Leone. For the last 5 years, every time I go to either ASCO or San Antonio, he's got a poster there about male breast cancer. And it's just such a pleasure to sit there and interview him, because the guy is interested in people like me. And, you know, I support all his research. I sign on for his grants and stuff because I believe in what he's doing. And I think he's changing the field. In general, though, the coalition partnered with a group called Citizen, CIITZEN, and they're trying to build a cohort of men for researchers, so that if we do have a doctor and he says, hey, I need 25 men for the study, I need 50 men for the study, they can go to Citizen, and with our express consent, we will participate, and we're just trying to grow that cohort. But as Michael will tell you, we're a tough bunch, man. It's hard to get a lot of men, you know, involved in the research or to share their stories. It's just been an uphill battle. And the last one I would mention is groups like BCRF, Breast Cancer Research Foundation. They've got the largest study on male breast cancer. People like Dr. Sharon Giordano and Dr. Fatima Cordosa and Dr. Love and Dr. Steffi Graf. These people are taking interest, and the study where they left off showed, you know, biologically there is a difference between male and female breast cancer, but the funding to see the difference between men and women, I don't think is there yet, or the interest hasn't been there yet. But I'm hoping webinars like this are going to
Yeah.
And I will say that the foundation has the Love Research Army program, and Michael Singer is actually part of our scientific advisory committee reviewing applications that get submitted. So we definitely have that male voice in there as well, and discussing when new studies come in that want to recruit via the Love Research Army, talking to them about inclusion and diversity and making sure that they're opening up that pool to a larger group of people. So
yeah, because a lot of times it's not that the researchers are evil, it's just that it never occurred to them. You know, that they've been isolated and it never occurred to them. It's the same thing with, you know, having an African American more or Hispanic or Asian. It's they do what they know, what their professor did. They do something sort of like that with a little twist, and it just doesn't occur to them to even ask the question sometimes. And I think that's why it's really important that we keep bringing it up and keep saying, you know, and why are you, this would be appropriate for both. This would be, you know, because otherwise they're not going to do it.
and the advocacy that's going
They've
on.
got a lot, you know, they have to get a promotion and they have a lot of other things to worry about.
Well, I think the advocacy work that's going on is fantastic, and especially with both Michael Singer and Michael Kovarik, and the impact you're making is fantastic. And so, so I think we're going to move on to the Q&A. So we have some questions that have come in. We had a question that was submitted yesterday, and this is actually for you, Michael Kovarik. Have there been additional challenges in getting good care as a gay man with metastatic breast cancer? Have you felt discriminated against either by the medical establishment or by others living with MBC? And I think you touched upon a little bit with the providers you have, but I think this follow-up of others with MBC is an interesting point as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I have been very, very fortunate that I have not been confronted with any of kind of discrimination or any type of, you know, we don't want to deal with you. But I think of, you know, gay women and men and transgender individuals like in places like Mississippi, or, you know, very, very conservative places where, you know, just some people knowing that you're gay can have its ramifications. And especially if you're in a place in rural America where there aren't as many places. You know, I'm very fortunate, even though I'm upstate New York, I have access to New York City. You know, I go to Dana-Farber in Boston for my oncologist and stuff. So I'm in a more fortunate place. But I think of those individuals where being gay is a much more heavier stigma to have, that you're going to be very reluctant to open up and share. You may not have the ability to travel to like a larger cancer center where you feel you might be much more accepted. You know, and so those are the things that I also try to think about. And I think, you know, that's also why I've been kind of talking when I do talk, letting people know, which is quite a big change for me, that, you know, I'm putting it out there that I'm gay. But it's also because I want researchers to know, I want doctors to know, you know, how lucky I have been in that the people that are my partner in this healing process, in this treatment, are people that are, it's not even an issue. But what about those individuals that are? If a doctor or a researcher, you know, listens to me or hears about me and we talk and they find out I'm gay and this and that, is it going to make them think differently about where and how they're treating people? And do they have that stigma? Do they hold that stigma against someone who is gay? And, you know, so I think that's, you know, like I said, for me, I've been very, very fortunate, but I know that there are thousands of women and men and transgender people where they don't have that luxury of being in a safe place.
Well, and we actually had a follow-up question from somebody else in relation to the same thing, and it goes along the lines of exactly what you're talking about, because the question was, Is fear of being outed a significant obstacle to participating in breast cancer research as a queer or trans individual? And I think you've touched upon that. So then kind of the follow-up question is, how can researchers do better to circumvent that obstacle? So maybe, like you say, in places where it's more accepted, it's not as much of an issue, but other places.
Yeah.
I think, I just want to say one thing, and then Michael, pass to you, but I think that the researchers should start from the position of everybody that could, and then say, are there reasons not to have these people in the study? What tends to happen is they start with, oh, well, we just know postmenopausal women, or we just know white women, or whatever there's in their clinic thing. And then they just study what's at hand, what's close at hand. So I think that one thing is to really prompt them to start with the whole menu and only get rid of people if there's a scientific reason. Only get rid of certain classes if there's a scientific reason. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And I think it also is how that individual approaches life. Is that individual someone who's holding biases against someone because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation? And that is when, to me, it's also the responsibility of that. Let's say if they're at a university or if they're part of a pharma company, that responsibility falls on also the university, the research facility that they're part of, that they're educating, each researcher on how they approach, diverse patients.
Mhm.
And any biases that they may hold that holds them back from, working with and partnering with, a different race, someone of a different race, someone of a different, gender, someone of a different sexual orientation. Because they're out there. I mean, the reality is, it's out there. But it's also, I think, researchers making themselves available to people, putting themselves and conferences, organizing situations where researchers and patients, diverse patients, can spend time. I mean, like one of the things my partner Tim and I did with Medivivers, with their C2C program, was driving the RV that we have, and we stopped at different research places, like in Seattle and in Portland, Oregon, and they were thrilled to talk with Tim and I. And one of the younger researchers said to me, we hardly ever get a chance to talk to patients. So if you put a researcher talking to a group that's made up of African Americans, that's made up of Hispanics, that's made up of gay, straight, transgender, women and men, it's that, that's when you're exposed to that, is when those biases start to melt and disintegrate.
That's a great point. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question. In a family with a strong history of breast cancer, should the male members of the family be followed as high risk? So kind of the looking at a woman who's a breast cancer survivor, other female relatives had breast cancer, no gene mutations, but should other relatives, including the males, be screened and followed as well?
Well, I could speak for myself. I mentioned earlier my sister had metastatic breast cancer. I never got to find out if she had a mutation or not. My mother had kidney cancer and my father had prostate cancer, and here I come along 2 years later with breast cancer. So to say high risk, I think that the male gender needs to learn, just like the young ladies did, how to do a self-breast exam and what the early warning signs are, so that if you consider yourself high risk, and I would say if your whole family's got some form of cancer, you're high risk for some sort of cancer. But to be able to know your early warning signs and what to look for is critical, and that starts as a young lady. I can remember when we first got married, my wife had a card in the shower that showed how to do a self-breast exam. And I was like, never even thought that, I had breasts or that, men would do it. So if we could change that, the stigma that it's not just a female disease, that would help people who are high risk and be aware of their bodies. I think most people are aware of their bodies and changes. But the thing is, when there is a change, what do you do about it? Who do you talk to about it?
And
It's also,
the other thing is, just because there wasn't a gene that they found in your family, I'm sure there's mutations we haven't figured out yet.
Yes, yes.
We have the ones we know about, and then there's the ones we just don't know about yet.
Yeah.
but well, I was just going to share that I think it's also very important that the men get tested. I mean, I am the only one in my family that has the BRCA2 gene,
Huh.
And so I think it is extremely important
Right.
that, the men be encouraged to also be tested, especially if it's a family that has quite a history.
Right.
Mhm.
Great.
That shouldn't be that expensive now that, if you're in a high risk family to run a panel like that should be covered by insurance.
Yeah, if you have family history.
Okay, well, we are running a little short on time, so I am going to end with a question for everyone, and then for anyone whose questions didn't get answered, we apologize that we weren't able to cover all the questions, but we hope we got a lot of it covered with what we did talk about. So one of the most important parts of discussing diversity and inclusion in any context is recognizing the unique experiences of others. So what are some resources for those who are watching to learn more about the stories of diverse communities in the breast cancer space?
I'll go first and mention the Male Breast Cancer Coalition.org. We share hundreds of stories of men, including mine and Michael's, and how we got to where we were. And everybody's story is a little different, and there's a lot of links there to other organizations to get information or get help. Definitely.
And there are a lot of advocacy organizations now. Long ago, when I first got into this field, there was nothing but except Why Me, but now there's an organization if you have left breast cancer versus right breast cancer, practically. So I think that and with the internet, you can pretty much research. So I think if you put in the advocacy, breast cancer, and whatever thing you want, you'd probably come up with something, wouldn't you? I think.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities to get involved, and I think ways for people to connect with the Male Breast Cancer Coalition and other organizations that were talked about today. For us at the foundation, join the Love Research Army. You'll hear about research studies that are going on out there, and we support those on our website. And so unfortunately, we are out of time today. I just want to thank the panelists so much for your participation and all of the feedback you were able to provide. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day for that. If you do have any questions that were not answered today or would like to get in touch with the foundation about the Love Research Army or any of our research initiatives, please feel free to email us at info@drsusanloveresearch.org, and we'll be happy to follow up with you on those questions that we couldn't get to today. Today's webinar has been recorded and will soon be posted to our website, which is linked in the chat box for your convenience. And I also encourage you to visit our website if you are interested in learning more about the foundation or making a donation in support of our research. I'd like to thank each of our panelists again for joining us today, and I hope all of you are staying safe and healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Bye.
Thank you.